I recently returned from a pilgrimage to Rome and Assisi in the footsteps of Saints Francis and Clare of Assisi. I was part of a team of friars leading a group of 10 young Capuchin Franciscans from the Midwest on a Franciscan pilgrimage, visiting and praying and reflecting at the places that impacted Saints Francis and Clare. I was there for 25 days, and despite the intense heat and humidity, it was a refreshing and renewing experience. And of course, in Italy, never a bad meal. I never thought a place could have an impact on me the way Assisi does while being on pilgrimage. And one of the places there that holds significance is the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. It is the site of an important event in St. Francis's ongoing conversion and literally living out the gospel of Jesus Christ. For those of you who might not know St. Francis's story, he was the son of a wealthy merchant and had been raised in privilege. But through the Holy Spirit and a series of life-changing events, Francis felt called by God to live a different way, a life of doing joyful penance, trusting in God alone, spiritually rebuilding the church, and offering humble service to those our society considers the least among us. Early on, as he was transitioning to conform his life to be more like Christ, St. Francis sold some of his father's merchandise and gave the money away to help rebuild a poor church. Of course, his father was furious upon learning how his son had given away his money. And it was here, in front of the church of Santa Maria Maggiore, that Francis was brought before the Bishop of Assisi, Bishop Guido, to settle the dispute with his father. It is the place where St. Francis stripped off all his clothes, gave him back to his father, and renounced his earthly inheritance, proclaiming his total dependence and trust on God as his Father. In St. Francis's stripping down naked and his renunciation of his earthly father, St. Francis said no to one life and took up a life of joyful penance. What I love about St. Francis doing this is that there is more than just physically stripping off his clothes. But it was also the renouncing of stuff, and not just physical, but emotional and intellectual, the stuff that we all hold on to, in order for him to make room for God and placing God as the priority of his life. And here's the cool thing in what St. Francis did. In renouncing all of his old priorities of wealth and status, he became poor in the eyes of society. But in reality, he had given up the emptiness of a life filled with stuff and became rich in the gifts of God, both as a recipient as well as a giver of love, forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of joyful gratitude. In a way, St. Francis is not unique in this. Most of the saints, like Ignatius of Loyola or St. Teresa, at some point and in some way, likewise renounce the stuff society says is valuable in exchange for the things of God. Now, this isn't to say the material world or even wealth is bad, but it is problematic that too often we place more value and give more attention to those things than we do to trusting and serving God as disciples of Jesus Christ. All three of today's readings warn of the senselessness of the vain pursuit of wealth and status at the expense of God. St. Francis understood this. There's a story that I came across that might help us to better understand what our readings are saying. And the story goes like this. There was once a very successful merchant who was moved to seek the way of holiness. And he traveled to a hermitage of a religious hermit who was deeply respected for his humility and wisdom. The hermit welcomed this rich man and invited him to sit at table in his small hut. And as the merchant explained the reason for his visit, the hermit prepared tea. And when it was ready, the hermit slowly poured the tea into the cup that he had placed before his visitor. And when the tea had reached the brim of the cup, however, the hermit continued to pour. Tea overflowed onto the table and then onto the floor. "Father, the cup is overflowing," the confused merchant said. "It cannot take any more." The religious hermit replied, "Just as you too are full. When you are empty, come back and I will teach you the ways of God." My sisters and brothers, you and I can also become overflowing with possessions and the attaining of status. You and I can become fixated both in pursuing more and building bigger barns in our lives to store even more stuff in. But as the religious hermit teaches the wealthy merchant, for you and I to be women and men of faith, to be real disciples of the gospel of Jesus Christ, it begins with our emptying of ourselves, of our stuff, in order to trust God and to create the place for God to dwell and fill. In the Franciscan world, it's called sine proprio, which means without appropriating, without attachment, to let go of things. Again, wealth in and of itself is not bad, nor are possessions necessarily bad, but holding on to them and trusting them to satisfy us, as well as making their attainment a priority, such that it takes us away from making room for God and the things of God, well, that is the danger. And the danger is not just with material things, but maybe it's our need to be right, or our pride, or stubbornness, our jealousies, and if we have it, even our hate. Whatever it is that you and I hold on to in such a way that we take up spiritual, mental, and emotional space away from trusting in God, you and I need to strip that away. You and I are being invited by Jesus Christ to let it go, to be without attachment, to strip away those things that possess us, like St. Francis did, in order to prioritize and trust God in our lives. Remember, to be rich in what matters to God is to place our trust in God's providence alone. What do you and I need to strip away? What are you and I attached to? Like we heard last Sunday on how to pray, our goal is to conform ourselves to God's will, as Jesus did, and the saints have done, like St. Francis of Assisi. As you and I continue on our pilgrimage of life, may you and I take inventory of our lives and the things that we hold on to, and sine proprio, strip ourselves of all those distracting attachments in order to free ourselves to make space and make a priority the true things of worth in our lives, which are the bountiful blessings of our loving God. Sine proprio. May the Lord bless you with peace and all good.